Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We had a second game last night. It wasn't quite as compelling from a competitive standpoint, but definitely a lot to talk about as the New York Knicks dismantled the Indiana Pacers in Game 5, winning 121-91, and this was definitely a big-time 180 from the Game 4 performance where it was the Pacers putting the work in against the Knicks, and the Knicks were able to do so in large part due to Jalen Brunson, who looked to be such a better rested version of himself and was able to go out and put up 44 points in this win, and again, just look like such a healthier version of himself. Now, there's definitely some questions you can point to in terms of the Pacers' ideologies behind trying to guard him that we will be getting into. But Brunson just continues on this tear where he has been such a hub of absolutely everything that has happened for the Knicks throughout this playoff run. And it is unfortunate that they're dealing with all of these injuries because they could definitely have, higher championship expectations. At this point, it seems like it is basically, just as far as Brunson can drag them, and they're going to have quite the matchup ahead of them with the Boston Celtics. If they were fully healthy, I do believe it would be a lot more of a series, but that's besides the point. Don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. Brunson, though, he has just been such a force, and a friend of mine sent me this stat earlier today that Jalen Brunson joins Jerry West, Michael Jordan, and LeBron James as the only NBA players to record 5 or more games of 40-plus points and 5 assists in a single playoff run. And it's just crazy to think that we are only not even a full 2 rounds through this postseason run, and Brunson has already put up the types of stats that he has. And, it's not artificial stats by any means. He is earning every single one of these baskets. That being said, the Pacers, I thought this was a really weird game for them. The fact that they are very clearly, we understand the youth factor of what this Indiana team is, and the fact that they were probably a little bit closer to a year away anyways, and they are building towards something. But I thought that Rick Carlisle, the fact that they weren't able to apply as much pressure on the Knicks in this game, and it seems like the Knicks almost bought into this idea of kind of running more and being able to push the pace, and stealing that from the Pacers was not great for them. And it's because it seemed like the Pacers were just playing a lot softer in my eyes in this type of a game. And the fact that and also on the defensive note, before we move on to their offensive concerns in this game, which I really do think were the bigger concern, I thought it was very strange the way that Rick Carlisle decided to sort of divvy up the minutes in terms of the Jalen Brunson defensive assignment, because we saw it in games 1 and 2. The fact that Andrew Nembhard has just not been able to guard Brunson, and he was, it seemed like, guarding him more than anybody else once again last night. And we saw Aaron Nesmith be able to sort of step into that role, and he was doing a really good job. Of course, the fact that Brunson was dealing with this foot injury played a role in it, but even more so, if Brunson is dealing with this physical ailment, try and throw extra size on him and physicality that is going to make it more difficult. And I'm not saying that Nesmith didn't guard him at all last night. And I thought when he did a good job, but it just seemed like time after time again, Nembhard was getting absolutely exposed by Jalen Brunson. And I don't know necessarily what it is with Nembhard, because if you look back to the Milwaukee series, he was getting up in people's grills. He wanted all the smoke. I think he was the one who got hit by Bobby Portis when Portis got himself ejected from one of those games as well, but just has not translated to this series. Jalen Brunson is making it a point to go after him, and he's making the most of it. And there were minutes where Jalen Brunson was on the court, and not just Aaron Nesmith, but the other player who has done the second best job of guarding Brunson in my eyes, and TJ McConnell, they were both on the bench together, and Brunson just time and time again was going after Nembhard. Felt like a mistake in my eyes to Rick Carlisle, but the other side of this is the fact that the Pacers offense just was not really existent tonight. And I do believe that in large part this has to do with the Tyrese Haliburton conversation because, just yet again, and we saw it looked like a shift in the aggression level and the want to be the alpha dog on the team. And last night, again, just fell so flat, only took 9 shots in the game, took 4 in the first half as the things were sort of, unraveling for them. One of them coming right at the, buzzer when he didn't really have a choice but to put it up. And this is somebody that we know can be an impact player from a scoring perspective. And granted, when he came into the NBA, it was more so as a passer, but it just seems like, there is something still to be desired from him, and does have me wondering a little bit, can he be the guy on a team? Now, I feel like personally I've sort of moved past this idea of trying to, project what the limits for an individual player are, but I was texting with one of my friends, and it was this idea of what true number one option on a successful playoff team didn't seem to have the, go-to scorer mentality this deep into his career. And I was really struggling to come up with other comparisons. The closest I really got to, I feel like, was with Jimmy Butler, but Butler came into the NBA with a very different set of expectations and the situation around him. They were already a playoff competitive team with a former MVP, another player that was top 4 in MVP rankings. Not that Joakim Noah was necessarily a go-to scorer, but I feel like the examples aren't necessarily there, which sort of took me to the idea of, let's say he's Chris Paul necessarily, and I know that there are going to be some people who are probably, offended by that opinion because of the fact that Chris Paul, we already know he's a Hall of Famer. We still have to see this next level from Haliburton, but the idea of, we know that he's super talented offensively and can score when he wants to, but at the same time, it seems like his natural instinct is to defer a little bit more. And I wouldn't say that Haliburton was bad last night. I thought he made a handful of good defensive efforts, and he was putting his teammates in good position to score, but nothing was falling. And it just feels like you wish there was this extra level of aggression from Tyrese Haliburton that, again, we've seen at times when you look back at the fall during the in-season tournament types of games. He was able to, at the end of these games, have everything operate through him, and he really trusted his three-point shot. He had those falling for him, but really since February, it's just been, seems like a change in, his desire to be that number one scorer. And I do think that the Pacers play with a really nice ball movement, and the pace that they move at is definitely something that I can get behind in terms of the infrastructure of a team, but I don't think that there is anybody else on this Pacers team that is going to evolve to that, true number one scorer. I think that Benedict Mathurin absolutely has the mentality for it, which is almost why at times they have had him come off of the bench, because he's so aggressive that they want him to run the second unit and operate a little bit more as a team with the starters. And I've liked Mathurin going back to college, but I don't think that he's ever going to be, and it's a comparison. It's a frustrating process because we know how good Haliburton is, but in terms of sort of, the peers that he is compared to, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, that was a debate at the beginning of the season. Jalen Brunson as well, in terms of, we're talking the best point guards in the league. And even if you go to that second tier and a De'Aaron Fox, like Fox won the Clutch Player of the Year award last year. We know that he does all of these other things great, but when the team needed it, he stepped up in those moments. And it just feels like Haliburton is very comfortable not dictating the game quite as much. And I don't feel that it was. Now, granted, the Knicks defense, you have to credit them for the performance they had last night. I thought that Isaiah Hartenstein was an absolute monster for them, and the Pacers just really couldn't get anything to go in the paint, and this is one of the teams that had the most points in the paint per game during the regular season. So the fact that the Knicks were able to take that away from them, and in a hostile environment in an extremely charged up Madison Square Garden sort of forced them to hit their outside shots and they just weren't able to do so, then, I understand from Haliburton's position, he was getting his teammates the open looks. They weren't necessarily falling. But at least in a game like this where you can feel it very early on in the third quarter that things were falling apart, if it weren't for Miles Turner knocking down those 3 consecutive threes, then game probably would have been over even before then, because then they went on that big scoring drought afterwards. But during that time, that's where you would like to see Haliburton sort of apply the pressure a little bit more, and that just wasn't the case. And I sort of hate to get on his case. I feel like I spent the majority of this segment sort of talking about how disappointing last night for Haliburton was. And again, I don't think that he was bad. It's just in terms of him being able to be, the best player on a championship team. When I go back to that Chris Paul comparison, I think that there's a chance it could play out in a very similar way. And again, I think that Haliburton can unlock it, but let me know in the comments section if you guys have any types of comparisons for this, but players in recent history that haven't had that alpha dog mentality for the first few years of their career, and then they were able to find it. Again, Jimmy Butler was the closest that I could really come to, but I feel like there were a lot of external factors there as well. But other than that, let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this series as a whole. We're going to be now taking our second break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, I want to sort of come back around to the conversation surrounding the NBA draft, and I want to, before we sort of finish out with these playoffs and move off the draft for a while here, I want to talk about some of the potential fits that I think would be best for both the organization and these players in particular. So stick with us, and we will be right back.